Everyone, welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look, the 2026 U.S. Open, Shinnecock Hills. Joined here as always by my guy Ron Kloss, PGA Splits 101. Ron, we're in this like weird. Weird's not the right word. It's like heater of USGA, U.S. Open events. I love major championships because I think the course and the venue ends up being the star, and I just don't think you get a better combination of Pinehurst #2, Oakmont, Shinnecock Hills. Cannot wait for this one. How are we doing?
Yeah, doing well. Completely agree. This is one I've had circled on my calendar since, way back when they first announced it was coming back here. I think I've always loved links golf, and, this is the closest thing we kind of have in America, at least on the major circuit.
Yeah.
And, you look at how it just punishes players. You just look at that score, like almost 5 strokes over par on average per round. You throw in all the elements, the wind. There's nowhere for those players to hide once it gets going like that. And obviously, the USGA had some issues the last couple of times here. And I'm pretty confident based on what I've heard that, they're going to be a little more conservative at the start. And I think that's what it should be. It should be kind of a crescendo where, you have Thursday, you're kind of easing in. And then by Sunday, that's when hopefully the chaos is fully out there. But I think you look at the field. I don't want to say it's wide open, but I just think it's a little bit more wide open where, you have Scottie and, obviously so many runner-ups still playing so well. He's at a tempting odds. I think he's 600. I think he's might be even more than that somewhere. But I just think it's just a field where, are you going to focus on players who are good in the wind? Are you going to look at links history, recent form? There's just so many variables to consider that I think the rabbit hole is really going to be a helpful tool with.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that today. The course is, you can go back and watch, and I have, I don't know that the 04 event is like super helpful in terms of like foretelling what's going to happen here. It is very entertaining to watch though, because we just don't see stuff like that. The weekend got really, really crazy in 04, in particular Sunday, where the scoring average was 79 on a par 70, and that includes them proactively watering like 5 holes after every group walked off the tee. Guys with hoses come down, hose it down, try to slow it down a little bit, and you still had scores 9 over par. And Saturday, back in 2018, the last time we were here, Saturday got a little wonky. They tried their best on Sunday to, put, I think, a lot more pins in the middle of the greens to do what they can. The problem is that it's not even like they trick the course up to, make it like this. It just is so exposed, like Ron said, to the elements. It is in the Hamptons, it's on the coast. It is link style. It's wide open. It's elevated up into that area too. So it just sits in a spot where it is absolutely inevitable to run into kind of insane weather at times. It looks like the forecast, we're going to get that a little bit on Thursday. I don't want to, play weatherman too far out, but like running into these really problematic winds is inevitable. Early forecast looks like that's going to happen again. So you're just going to have the situation where, par is a really good score on a lot of holes. And it makes for an interesting test because we don't really see that very often. Now we had Aronimik, and you can make the case that Aronimik kind of tricked it out. They had to do something very specific to set up that golf course to keep scores in check, and it worked. But it did create some, you could say, boring golf. We're not going to have that here at Shinnecock. And to Ron's point, with the top of the leaderboard or the top of the odds board being a little bit of maybe some wide open questions. I guess Scottie leaves questions for us that we don't typically have when he goes and plays like he did at Jack's place last time out. It's been a place he's kind of run over and then didn't. But I think the narratives are very, very strong. Before we get into that, let's look here at the field. Look at our odds board here, courtesy of Sharp Stack over at 4for4. You could shop around and get Scottie north of 550. I think maybe these are a couple of places that might have some like bonuses or some other numbers that are a little bit bigger than that. But again, we've seen Scottie going off at 4-1, 3-1 at a handful of events as of late. So getting that closer up to 6 is pretty interesting. Rory between basically 9 and 12. Jon Rahm, kind of their own tier, I guess you would say. Rahm there as high as 14. Then you got a pretty sizable group, right around the 20 to 30 range. Cam Young, Matt Fitzpatrick, Xander Schauffele, Tommy Fleetwood, who played outstanding here last time on Sunday. Had shot a 63 and left some shots out there. Went real hot on the back. Ludwig, Bryson, those guys are all short of 30. Then you get kind of another tier of Brooks, Wyndham Clark, Colin Morikawa, Sam Burns, Russell Henley, Siwoo, JT, Hatton, Goddard, Reed, Cantley, all kind of right around 50. Then you kind of get a new teardrop. There's not much in the mid 50s and 60s, and you kind of fall off into like the 75 range. So, but again, to Ron's point, feels a little bit more open now. Again, we can look real silly anytime we say it feels really wide open. And Scottie is a lot of narratives for Scottie. We have Father's Day for a lot of these guys on Sunday. That also happens to be Scottie's 30th birthday, and also Scottie can seal the deal for the Grand Slam. So like the narratives rolling into Scottie make a ton of sense here. But again, not a reason alone to make some bets, but definitely an interesting odds board. Again, shop around. Things are going to move here on a Monday, but I'm sure people have picked off some really nice futures. I know Ron and I are both a little bit active over the weekend, trying to get in some numbers we thought were going to maybe go away. And that's, kind of proven to be the case in some instances. So again, continue to shop around here. Some people are going to wait for the win, Ron, to see if there's a wave advantage. That makes a lot of sense as well. Again, early forecasts on Thursday in particular show the wins are going to be fairly unavoidable. So I do think you see some softer pin placements, some middle of the green stuff, because they don't typically roll these greens out to be super duper fast. Let's get into some of the course stuff. Because you really can't, just like an Open Championship in a way, like Ron said, link style golf course, you can't trick the greens out too much because the winds.
Yeah, so there's just so many components to this course. And, one of the things that, this year the fairways are going to be about 7-8 yards wider than they were even in 2018. So we're looking at 48-yard wide fairways. And, people are going to say, oh, well, that just makes it easy off the tee. But again, when you throw in all the elements, the wind, a lot of these, and I guess I'll get into here, there's so many parts that are interesting to talk about with this course. So just doing the research on it, it's so strategic. And, I didn't even think about this watching it back in 2018, but when you look at the holes, like most of these fairways sit at an angle to the tee shot. There's really nothing that's you're just hitting it straight ahead. Like everything's on an angle. Even
the approach shots at a different angle than off the tee, right? So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily dog legs, like typical dog legs. Some of them are. A lot of kind of snake fairways. But even with the dog legs where, you think, well, the bigger hitters, they just cut across the dog legs. But it's not just about being in the fairway. It's also about where you are, because this course is all about angles. Rory McIlroy had a great quote about, angles really do matter here. And so it's not just being in the fairway. It's, do you have an angle to the green where you're going to have access to the pin location that, again, trying to do your best to create as many uphill putts as you can, because, again, the slope greens here, you do not want downhill putts. And so off the tee, players not only have to hit a precise line, but they also have to consider how far are you going to hit it, considering rollout. Again, firm and fast. This is kind of the idea of the week here. You have sandy soil, obviously, right on this area of Long Island, which kind of gives it a lot of its links characteristics. Another thing, as we've talked about, it's right on the water, and not just on the water, but it's kind of sitting on this high point in the area. So it's even more exposed to the wind than typically would be. And so, again, we're bringing into things like, how do you flight your shots? Can you hit the ball both ways? How good do you control your ball in the wind? Some of that stuff, we can obviously look in the rabbit hole and see how players have performed in windy conditions in the past. And then like the routing, like William Flynn designed this, 1931, and it's just brilliant routing because, most of the holes, even shots within holes, play in different directions. And so most of the time, just going back and watching 2018, you can just see the thought process going on in players' minds, and they're just trying to figure out exactly which way is the wind blowing for this shot right here. And then you throw on the terrain, you have, this is kind of where, I think some of the Augusta National Comp comes in. You have all these uneven lies in the fairways. You have elevation changes up and down. These greens are tilted, and they're also crowned and kind of elevated. And so that's what makes the approach game so difficult. And another thing I love, and I know a lot of people have talked about, and we all love to see this when you have tons of short grass around the greens. And so very little rough here. And so you're hitting into the wind on approach. You have, these crowned greens. And again, when the ball gets near the edge of the green, and not just false fronts, I mean, we have, if you overhit greens, like you're dead, because the ball's going to roll 20 to 30 yards off the back. And so there's just so much intrigue. I think around the green is just going to be huge this week, because, you look at 2018, the made fairway percentage was 71%, very high. Then you look at the greens and reg, it's 54%. And so that's a sign right there that, there's going to be a lot of shots hit from these short grass areas. And there's also, we haven't got to the blind shots. Like there's blind tee shots, there's blind approach shots. So you're adding something Scottie because somewhat complained about in the past, that unpredictability, that there's some things that, players are not going to be able to control this week. And I think all that combined together is kind of what makes this such a fun week.
Could not agree more. Yeah, there's, and I highly recommend people go rewatch, again, not a ton of time between now and then, but, the full final round of 2018 is on YouTube. You can watch the full final round of 04. And again, like I said, maybe not super relevant for how they're going to do it this week, because I think they've been really clear that they want Shinnecock to be Shinnecock. So they some of the tightening of the fairways that they even did in 18, they are not doing this year. So you're going to hear a lot about, these wide fairways. But to Ron's point, like, yes, they're wide, but at an angle, you do have to worry about like where your distance is, because you could run out of fairway with the angle that you're trying to leave yourself in for your approach shot. So like, yes, the width of the fairway at its widest point is pretty wide, but hitting fairways again in 2018 wasn't a super hard issue for everybody. Now, again, you were absolutely dead if you missed, because you will see these are classified as large greens, but very similar to Pinehurst, where the actual playability of the green is much, much, much smaller in terms of your landing space into, holding the green and keeping it on there. So you do see in the correlated course list, not a bunch of like old school US Open tracks. You do have Pinehurst on there, but then you start to see a lot of the, Open Championship Rhoda on there before you get to Augusta, which again, Augusta, very wide fairways off the tee, large greens, but in terms of where you can actually land on the green, it's very difficult. And then again, similar to Augusta, shaved runoffs, where if you're having a scramble, you're having to pick off into these elevated green complexes that are very slopey. So I think the Pinehurst Augusta Open Championship is kind of the corollary course mix this week, more so than anything else, especially US Open related. So you're going to get some US Open stuff in there, and that's going to be, I think, just score relative to par, distance type stuff. But in terms of trying to get a sense of how it's going to play, I do think those courses that are listed on there are a pretty great way to look at it. So yeah, there's just some great holes. I mean, risk reward. I do think you see, if you watch Brooks and DJ, and that's, second to last group in 2018, a lot of iron off the tee. They're just trying to keep themselves in play. Obviously those guys have distance, so distance is an advantage for them because they can hit that driving iron a mile and it roll out. But I think you'll see some of that in the data. And these are hard because we just don't have, we don't have data from 04. We have limited 18 data, but let's look at the core stats page here for Shinnecock Hills. You can see it's a very, very long 7,400 yard par 70. So again, you have the two fewer par fives here. A lot of bunkering. We know the average scoring conditions are difficult. Not a lot of water. It's just, kind of one hole of water for you to kind of navigate there. But again, kind of comes into play. Falls front, very much back to front. Where you're like, oh, it's just one water hole. But no, it can very much be in the mix. You talked about the large greens, but again, they are not very not large in terms of how they play. You will have, I think, a graduated rough first cut-ish, but then you get into like the fairly gnarly fescue, which can really look at like 8-inch fescue, and you're having to play sideways to get yourself out of there. Mixed off the tee, I do think it's going to be very, very player specific. I'm interested to see how some of the longer players approach it. Does a Rory, does a Bryson, Ludwig, do those type of guys take the Brooks DJ approach, or do they try to navigate and send it with a little bit more driver off the tee? And again, you get in these spots where fairway accuracy is easy and scoring is insanely difficult. Just goes to show it gets harder as you get closer to the hole here. So obviously everything from there on out is difficult. From an off the tee standpoint, you could see here, 2018, we saw driver usage about 6% less than we see on a PGA Tour event typically. And again, I think this is going to be pretty drastic player to player. You can see that driving accuracy significantly higher, to Ron's point, but still we see it reflected in the approach details, the greens and reg. Very difficult. Death. Greens and reg from the rough, 23%. I mean, you were done from the rough. I think even from the first cut to be able to hold it, spin it. That could be not only from the rough, it could be into a elevated green with a false front into some wind, which gets, again, really treacherous. And these guys USGA does not have to soup this thing up. It's just how the land plays, how the elements play, and that creates a lot of fun stuff for us to watch. Going for the green stuff doesn't matter a ton because we have, fewer par fives. The par 5 16th is a 3-shot hole for everybody. So you're going to have less of that. You really just have to be kind of dialed. You'll see that in the approach shot distribution stuff too. Like that's pretty flat. I don't think anything jumped out to here for me. You see a little bit more from the 150 to 175 range. You got a little bit more from like the 250 plus from the fairways, 250 plus total. But again, I don't think there's anything that we need to be super dialed into there specifically. You see past leaderboards. Not a lot of under par. You saw a lot of bogeys out there. You saw some numbers for the taking there on Sunday. Like we said, the Saturday stuff got a little bit crazy. I thought it was really interesting watching back on the final group of Finau and Daniel Berger. Those guys went out like super early on Saturday. Like they started the day at like mid 30s on the leaderboard, and then played their round, had been done for 5 hours, and then they find out, hey, you're going off first because everyone came back to you on Saturday afternoon, and it got really crazy. So again, Sunday was a little different. They put a lot more pins in the middle of the greens to try to make it play it a little bit more friendly. But even then, you saw the day play over par. Anything specific on the course metrics you want to highlight?
Well, just going back really quick to what you talked about with the comp courses, I think
Sunday at the US
Shinnecock
Open definitely had a different vibe. USGA trying.
This guy's always taking in content. You can't stop him.
Shinnecock is just a beast once it dries out.
Give me 1 second.
If you look here in the round 4, look at the scoring average and go back here. I mean, this is
okay.
hilarious.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. I have no idea what just popped up on my phone.
You're good. It was on brand. It was content.
But no, what I was saying is, there's really hard to pick a course that's similar, to Shinnecock. There's not many. So obviously a couple of the open courses. But like you said, I think Pinehurst, there's some differences, but I think that is a really good list to use. And then going back to what you're saying about the rough and some of these approach stats that we're looking at, it's 5 inches, and it's only about 8, from what I've read, about 8 feet further on past that, it's getting to 10 inches. And then right after that, you're getting into, I think John Bodenhammer, who's one of the guys in charge of setting up this course. He talked about it's 2 feet, and it's called blue stem fescue. And it's very, apparently it kind of turns out kind of a purpley brown color. And so, yeah, you're pretty much dead. And if you're going off the beaten path here. And so, I think it was interesting when I watched 2018 as well. And, I went back and looked at the data, and Brooks only hit driver 57% of the time. And so he was even below the field average. So I think accuracy is something that is going to be a huge focus for me this week. And even I was thinking, with wider fairways, you take a guy who's a shorter hitter like a Brian Harman, who he can, in my mind, he can create an advantage. If he say he hits 85% of fairways and he's hitting to his spots, and yes, his iron shots are a little further in, but he's on the right angle to the green. He's not worrying about the rough. I think that guy has just as good a chance to win as someone who's more of a bomber type, who's, a Minwoo Lee, who's taking some chances, who's maybe trying to cut a few corners to see what he can get away with. And so I think that's the interesting part for me, kind of even when looking at this data is, and going through the rabbit hole and seeing, okay, distance from edge of the fairway, that's one of the tools we use. Even looking at our missed fairway penalty filter, where it's obviously going to be set to high this week, seeing what kind of guys, when you're in this situation. And that's one of the differences between here and Augusta, where, you could kind of bomb away at Augusta because the rough is so short. Once you get further into the hole, I think it becomes very similar to Augusta. But I just think the wide fairways is going to add just another level of strategy that, I'm really looking forward to this week. And just a few other things, in the bottom of the article, I kind of go over some of the key stats, but obviously par 70. So we're looking at par 4 scoring is huge this week, so set that filter to difficult in the rabbit hole. And I think our new strokes gain data in there where you can kind of look at, see who kind of plays well. So again, only 2 par 5s. I think that's another thing to take away from kind of a lot of the best hitters who are long kind of take advantage of those par 5s on a typical course. You have 4 of them. You only have 2 here. So really, really narrowing it down to who are the best, par 4 scores on difficult courses. Again, bogey avoidance, double bogey avoidance. We can take a look at all those scoring metrics, but I think those are going to be really key this week as well.
I couldn't agree more. I love that too. The call out on like the Harman and the stylistic off the tee stuff is going to be fascinating to watch. But this is the ideal setup. These are the ideal situations where we aren't crossing off a bunch of names on the board automatically before we start based off of their lack of distance. Like this is, even though it is a very long par 70, I think these guys are all in play because they, again, if you have control of your golf ball off the tee, you lack distance, but you can get away and gain strokes with your driver through accuracy. Maybe you can hit, maybe a Russell Henley and a Brian Harman can hit driver off the tee where, someone's maybe Roy's trying to lay back a little bit because you can't guarantee he's going to keep anything else, on the planet. And you can't be in the purple 10-inch fescue that you're going to have here. So these are the fascinating tests. And I think that's why, Pinehurst was appealing. That's why I think we saw, interesting names in the top of the leaderboard at Oakmont, where it was different, where he was more really thick rough everywhere. But at the same time, like you could not really hang if you couldn't keep the ball in play off the tee. The differences, I think, very much, from Oakmont as we get closer to the hole, and you've, highlighted those too. So yeah, it's great. I think it's a fantastic test of the professional game. The elements open it up to these scenarios where it gets really, really crazy and really unpredictable. Some guys don't like that as much, but it's just part of the game. And I think there's just not a lot of things that they can do to slow it down. Like we talked about, they're going back to the fairway width that the membership plays. And they're going to try to not roll the greens out as fast because you really can't have 12 and a half stimp greens when winds can gust to 30. It is somewhat unplayable. So you can be a little bit more cognizant of where you put pins, but it also is unavoidable. What they can't do is stop 35-mile-an-hour wind gusts from gusting. What they can't do is stop these insane back to front green complexes from sloping and running and taking your ball somewhere you don't want to go. So it does create an entire test of controlling your golf ball for 4 days through the elements, knowing that your peers are going through it too, and who can come out standing at the top regardless of score. So, I think we both agree that I don't want tricked up score relative to par just for the sake of doing it. I want to see good golf shots rewarded, bad punished, and who can kind of keep it going between the ears. It was a great quote. I think you referenced it in your preview too. And I saw that with the no laying up guys. They want every club used in the bag, and they want the 15th club too, which is between your ears. You got to be able to hang and just know that you're going to be in the shit at times. And then how can you come out of it and make sure they're like, all right, bogey's a good score on this hole right now based off of where I am. How can I just take that and go to the next hole and avoid the doubles and the big blow up holes? Because it's inevitable. So you're going to have some big numbers, and just who can keep those off the scorecard is going to get rewarded. So the number of, I would say long putts, but like just those like 7 to 12 par saves that Brooks had to hit was interesting too. Because again, I don't know that we're going to model a ton of putting. Like that's a huge piece of it this week, right? I don't know what the predictability is in, holding putts from that range in terms of like forecasting and modeling, but it is on the menu this week. You are going to have to save par from that range, that like 33 to 50% range in terms of like makeability mark, a bunch this week for the winner. Like that guy is going to have to make a bunch of those par save putts. DJ couldn't make them. Brooks made them in bunches on Sunday, and that's why he won. Sorry, you're muted.
Everything you just said kind of also brings up the strategy. I mean, from a betting DFS perspective of, okay, so how do we take all these things and how does it affect what players we're picking? And so one of the conundrums for me is you look at two guys near the top of the board here. You have Xander Schauffele and Tommy Fleetwood. And obviously, if you look at Xander's U.S. Open history, it's like when you look at the course history sheet I did, he has the best average finishing position at U.S. Opens over the past decade. Like Xander has been tremendous here. But then, okay, this is not a typical U.S. Open venue. So you look at Tommy Fleetwood, who not been the best U.S. Open player, but I think we both agree this course, the style of it kind of fits Fleetwood's game a little better. Obviously he has a lot more links history, playing in a lot of those tournaments, even going back years. Again, don't get me wrong. Xander has every club in the bag. Xander can do anything. But I think when you're trying to make those decisions and you're comparing players, I think all these things we're talking about kind of goes into that. And you have to consider how do players play in the wind, how, looking at Pinehurst as an example, or, the Open Championship courses, I think that's where, a lot of that course history stuff, you're kind of looking and you're trying to compare. And another guy like Tyrrell Hatton, he's going back and looking at the data. He is literally the best links player in this field. And so, like you said, it comes down to, for me, it's an approach through putting game this week. Off the tee is going to be lower on my weights because I think there's so many ways you can kind of get it done off the tee. But again, looking at short grass areas, how do you chip off those? And just really using the rabbit holes difficulty filters to try to get the best picture we can.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think the modeling off the tee is going to be really tricky, but to me, it's just going to be such a fascinating watch to see, club selection. You'll see just these different groups, within it. Just guys have insanely different strategies in terms of how they do it. We saw that in 18. I think we see it even more here with, again, fairways being a little bit more generous. But again, don't let that fool you. To Ron's point earlier, like, yes, you're going to be able to hit green. You're going to hit fairways at a high rate, but the guys hit fairways at a high rate in 2018. So I don't think that changes. Just the strategy of what guys want to do and how they push it down is going to be pretty interesting. So you can see it's all loaded here in the rabbit hole. DraftKings salaries are in here as well. Some of those are fairly interesting. Tommy's a great call out. Tommy should have won that. I mean, he left some putts on the back. He got white hot. It's so hard to say the guy shot a 63 and was probably a little disappointed considering the some of the scores, but he did not birdie the par 5 16th hole, and he did not birdie 18, though he left himself like a 6-foot uphill putt. Very much had that right in his grasp. With a great Sunday. So let's start there. We'll look at some of the difficult scoring features. The tough part with the comp course stuff, and I don't know how you feel about it. I think we've done a good job narrowing down what the comp courses are. The problem is a lot of these are just major championships that have 4 rounds, once a decade. And like, it's just such a random small sample. So we're grabbing all these small random samples. Let's just take a look and see what happens here. We'll load the comp courses. I do think it is a little bit directional, a little bit signal. Let's look, we'll go back, see the last 5 years of the comp courses. I think that captures most of the ones that are played here. Yeah, you get a pretty huge sample for most of these guys. Yelam Raju, 4 rounds. He's getting a sawgrass bump here. We'll pull that out just to make sense of this. We're going to pretty much do anything. You're going to get Scottie at the top of data. Otherwise, you're probably looking at some weird data. Ludwig's played well at these comp courses as well. Again, there's some sawgrass in there for sure for Ludwig, a smaller sample from others. Colin Morikawa, again, you're getting, I think we're probably just on the cusp of actually losing some of the really good, although Royal St. George's would be Morikawa Open Championship. Rory, Xander, Henley, Patty Reed, Jon Rahm. Those guys are all gaining at least a stroke and a half on the field on comp courses over the last 5 years. Then you get Lowry, Fleetwood, Hatton, some of the guys you've called out here, Bobby Mack, Cam Smith, Hideki, Brooks, Cantley, Tom Kim, Rosie, and Fitz. Those guys are all gaining at least a full stroke on the field in these comp courses here the last 5 years, if you're looking to kind of start there. Now, again, people have mixed feelings on 5 years, comp course data.
And
again,
just
part of the puzzle.
Just a quick pro tip. If you, for example, don't think TPC Sawgrass is a good comp, you can X that out and it will run again and click apply. And so you have the ability, to whatever you think, what your research tells you. I think some people may disagree. Sawgrass, obviously, it's a different type of event.
Sure.
So you have, again, a lot of flexibility to change those.
Yep. You can add one too. One we don't have, and you're like, no, I think this is definitely a comp course. Just go ahead and add it to the list. But yeah, you go ahead and take out Sawgrass. And again, part of that kills the sample for a lot of the guys, but also I agree with that too. Still see Scottie, Colin, Rory, Xander, kind of separating there, but some other good stuff from, a lot of the new guys. Goddard actually pops up a little bit in that small-ish sample relative to the other guys here, but some of the same names. So that's one way to go about it. Let's get into some of the other filtering options, and we look at just how guys have played on difficult and very difficult scoring tests. Again, we don't have a lot of very difficult, so I think adding difficult at least is a good start. And again, you can add major, you can add course length, you can do whatever you want there to kind of back things up a little bit. But say we look at the last 18 months, so going back to the start of 2025, who's played the best on courses that have difficult scoring. We look at scoring average. Again, pretty much the top of the board, and that is like that for a reason. Scottie and Rory, Rahm's right there. And again, those are your top 3 on the odds board. Hatton pops up. Ron's already given him a shout out today. There's Patrick Reed. Patrick Reed played outstanding golf here in 2018. Was very, very much in the mix there on Sunday. Fleetwood as well. Bryson, small-ish sample, doing a lot of it off the tee. You can see the approach and around the green lagging behind. Bobby Mack, Russell Henley, Xander, Ludwig, Sammy Burns. Harris English likes tough golf tests. Jocko with a small sample. Noren, Colin, Mav, Spawn, Keegs, Hovland, Spieth, all at a shot above the field. So, and that's, again, going back to the last 18 months. Difficult golf tests. If you want to look at, a smaller sample, see some guys that have popped here late. See if some new names pop up here. Rosie, again, you and I will, I think, have the same discussion. He's almost impossible to model, in my opinion. Like, he just doesn't typically model as well as where he is on the odds board or what he ends up doing in big championship golf tests. It is what it is. Again, he had a late tee time on Sunday here last time as well. Some names that weren't in there previously. Cam Young pops up looking at the last 9 months. Some other smaller sample stuff for just the 4 rounds from other guys. Poston's going to get his 4 rounds there at Muirfield Village, but that's kind of it.
Let's do this real quick.
Yeah.
So the rabbit hole, if you go to just very difficult, so go back to the filters and get rid of difficult. So again, this is the most difficult test they will face. It's the toughest scoring course in the last decade. And so this is another way I like to just kind of filter through things, take maybe a little larger sample here, but anything on very difficult is plus 1.5 strokes over par. So, difficult, you're getting some of those. Oh, I only played a stroke over par for that day. This is going to be the plus 1.5 and up. So again, just trying to mirror as best we can what we're going to see. Sample should be pretty decent, but I think this is another way if you want. Well, this is the reason I built it like this. So you have 5 different levels of scoring, and if again want to look at the real difficult stuff, which we don't get all the time, even in some of the majors recently, I think this is just another kind of cool way to look at it.
See if it wants to play nicely. There you go. Yeah, it's going to be a smallish sample, but if you go back a little bit, let me pull up a different window. Get this up. All right, let's see if it wants to play. All right, we're going to go. I mean, let's play around. We'll see what we get sample-wise. We'll go very difficult. Let's look last 3 years and see what it says. Again, you can mess around with the sample. We're showing it to you. This is free content. So hit the thumbs up, subscribe, all those things. If you want to do it differently yourself, promo code US Open, $1 for the week. So check it out. If you disagree with our sample sizes or disagree with our comp courses, it's available here for you to mess around with for sure. So real decent sample size for these guys last 3 years. Scottie, Rahm, Xander, small sample for Smalley, but again, we're getting the Smalley 4 rounds at a Ronamink. Rory's right there. Colin, Henley, small sample for Matthew Jordan and Nick Hardy, but good for them. They've played pretty well in those samples. Tommy Fleetwood, Bryson, Sepp, Ludwig, Cam Smith, still the last 3 years. So that's actually pretty encouraging for Cam Smith. This is not off the tee, but that's kind of the Cam Smith MO all the time. Hatton, Corey, Matty Schmidt, Ortiz, smallish samples. So yeah, this is not a bad sample of data. Let's look even last 2 years and see if we can get at least 24-ish rounds for a lot of guys. Let's put a minimum round feature on. Rahm, Scottie, Henley, Xander, still that same sample for Smalley, Bryson, Rory, Corey Connors, Morikawa, Reed, Burns. Those guys are all right around 1.5. So again, gaining a stroke and a half on the field when the field on average is basically losing a stroke and a half is a nice way to kind of separate. So it's a good call up. You get the best of the best on top for the most part. That's why they're the best. I mean, we always say the difficult tests are what separate the elites. No surprise.
And you and I have talked about Cam Smith a little bit, but I just think he's someone to watch for this week. Obviously he started working with a new coach. We saw the results already. He's gained on approach in 3 of his last 4. I think he gained almost 1.6 strokes per round at the PGA Championship on approach. And so off the tee is always going to be somewhat of an issue. But like we talked earlier, I think this is a course where you can get a little flexible with how you play this. And he clubs down a little bit.
Internet or my internet, but I think my internet's on the struggle bus.
Yeah, but I think he's a good look this week.
He sprayed it all over the place at a Ronamink and survived for a little bit there. And we touch on it matters the more you get closer to the hole. Even though this Cam Smith has been a different Cam Smith than previous versions, Cam Smith, as you get closer to the hole, is his best, attributes. He is still a wizard on and around the greens. And if you're going to have to chip and putt here a ton, there's some intrigue there for sure on a spot that maybe plays a little bit more generous off the tee, considering that that's really his kind of bugaboo. What are some other core ways that you want to look at modeling this week? I know you mentioned par 4 scoring, difficult test. It's obviously a difficult approach test. What are some other, I think, core ways you want to look at the stats this week?
Yeah, I think from an approach perspective, very difficult. Just focusing on approach is something I'm going to do for sure, and probably the same with around the green, looking at the short grass areas. But I think when you get these weeks, as most typical majors are very difficult on approach, I think this is one of the most important things you should be weighing. And again, recent form comes into play here as well. You want players who are hot with their irons, but I think also just looking back historically at kind of who performs well, when it does get difficult on approach, and also using our new scoring metrics that maybe we can show at the end here too, where, who's giving themselves chances on these types of courses, I think is another way to look at it.
Small sample for some of these guys. If we just look at the last 6 months, obviously with, live guys or, Patty being, playing mostly on the senior tour. But then you get into JJ Spawn. Again, I'm looking at just approach last 6 months where it's difficult and very difficult to gain. Spawn, Morikawa, Justin Rose, Brooks Koepka, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Ludwig, who, like people will tell you that Ludwig's, a bum and doesn't ever deserve to be where he is in the odds board or whatnot. I understand he's not closed the deal enough, but it's like Xander a couple years ago, just couldn't win until he won a few times, and then things change. Berger, Ryan Gerard, Adam Scott, Patrick Reed. There's Xander, Akshay, Sepp, Rory, Tom Kim, Wyndham Clark, Alex. Then you get all the way down to Scottie. This is kind of surprising. This is, why we only probably have one win this year. He's, gaining a half stroke on the field on approach, where this is typically where Scottie separates. And again, like overall, he's been great, but he's been, so good around the green, and the putter's been good. Obviously T Degree is still a elite player, still the best player in the world, but this is kind of why we are where we are this year with Scottie relative to where he's been over the last couple of years. So interesting to see that. And again, mess around with the sample on your own. If you'd like the bigger time frame, you want a shorter time frame, you want to hone in on the last X amount of rounds, you can do all this yourself to take advantage of that promo code and jump in for $1. I think looking at difficult approach tests are a great way to look at it too, for sure.
Let's look at around the green. Since most of the shots, guys miss greens are going to be from short grass, definitely put that scrambling on short grass to difficult. If you kind of want to, since it is an all-around difficult test, difficult, very difficult, kind of combines that together too. So I don't mind doing that. This is one I would take maybe a little bigger sample. Guys, around the green play, not as volatile as some of the other ones, approach and putting. So, it's going to obviously pull some of the Pinehurst rounds. I think LA Country Club, some of the Open Championship courses as well are going to be on here. So just another way to look at, around the green, and got a variety of around the green metrics. Love using around the green proximity. So just different ways you can look at it. Again, when you take the scrambling out, you're taking the putting out. So that's what I love about ARG proximity. It kind of gives you the kind of 100% view of how good a player is as far as how close can they chip to the hole in these tough short grass areas. So, and you can even look at ARG prox specifically from the short grass, which again, very crucial this week.
Yeah, even I would probably personally, I would do this. I would take the scrambling out because again, the scrambling still has an element of putting. So if you just want to look, very difficult to gain around the green, removing the putting piece here specifically. You've seen this is a pretty big sample for a lot of these guys. Rahm's up here, Spawn's up here, Mav, Kurt Kitayama. Here's Rory, Cam Young. Again, this is part of why these guys have separated. Like these guys have contended. Roy's won back-to-back Masters. It's a lot of demand on your around the green proximity on short grass there. That was part of why Cam Young was very much in the mix this year. While some of his long-term around the green numbers aren't great, there are, I think, some changing, developing skills there. Siwoo, great around the green consistently. Scottie too. Here's Tommy, JT, Hideki, Spieth, Ricky, some guys that we know, kind of their bread and butter and their MO. You can look at this through, strokes gained around the green, which is capturing a lot of this. Here's where you're going to get Cam Young, Patrick Reed. Scottie's right there too. A small sample for Padraig. Sanjay still getting it done around the green. Jason Day. Like these are, to your point, with a bigger sample. I agree. And I think what you're trying to say here is it's like a baseline skill. It ends up being more sticky. So I feel safer going back a little bit of ways because this is a skill set the guys can develop, but also do feel like someone having 3 years of showing this as a core tenet of their skill set is something that I'm okay pulling back some old data for sure. So just remembering, if you're pulling in any scrambling specific stuff, you're looking at scrambling short grass, you are pulling in an element of putting, which is part of it too. So you see scrambling short grass, Small sample, Yellow Mirage, but that's been good. Sune's been good there. Then you get to Russell Henley, Matt McCarty, Pat Reed again. Wrighton, Bobby Mack, some guys that spent a lot of time in Europe. Kitayama spent a lot of time in Europe before he started coming on the PGA Tour. Spawn's been really good at this. Again, Fitz, Sepp, Tommy, Rory. Again, this is why you get the Open Championship corollaries. It makes sense that you get this from some of the Euros, which, again, is not surprising. We'll bring back the scrambling around the green short grass stuff. I love when we have around the green play mattering because we have so many different ways to look at it. And I do think you can gain an edge by how you slice and dice and look at the data, what you're pulling in, what you're separating. I think that can matter quite a bit. So if we look at scrambling short grass with the scrambling short grass difficult feature on, here's some good news for Matt Fitzpatrick backers. Here again is Kitayama, Patrick Reed, Nikolai Højgaard. See some of the other big names, Rahm and Spawn, Cantley's here, Scottie, Hideki, Harman, Tommy. Again, this is all relative to field average. And again, we have a difficult feature on. These guys are still above field average in these difficult tests, which is really cool to see. Again, you could look at this in the inverse and see who's really struggled in these spots too, to see is there anyone with a big enough sample, some guys that are maybe not good at this. This is not great news for Colin. Hovland, Adam Scott, Boxy, some guys that towards the top of the board people are considering. Xander, again, he's got all of it. Still really good here from an around the green standpoint. Same thing with like a Mav. Like to see that, but if it's kind of red everywhere, same thing. Hovland and Morikawa and Adam Scott are still gaining around the green in these samples, but the specific short grass stuff is not great. So lots of different ways to go about it. That's for sure.
It's also cool to look at comparatively with the rough and short grass columns right next to each other. Kind of, you can see the delineation as far as, who kind of struggles. I saw Rory really good in the short grass, not as good in the rough. So that's good news for him this week.
Yep. Same thing for actually a lot of these guys towards the top, which is fascinating. So what else? What else do you want to look at? Before we wrap?
Also look at strokes gained par 4. So got a whole section if you want to look at par 3 holes, par 4, par 5. Obviously not par 5, not as big of a factor this week, but and again, you could look at it from this view. You could look at it with a difficult par 4 filter on, which might be beneficial to kind of get that difficulty factored in there. Many different ways you can look at it here. Again, if you want to look at a strokes gain perspective, so who's gaining the most strokes on these specific par 4 holes. If you want to look at birdie or better, which is going to be pretty far and few between. This is a par week for sure. It might even be a bogey week where you're just trying to say bogey sometimes. So I think we can look at would love to look at double bogey scoring here after this too. That's going to be crucial this week, as it always is in majors.
Last 12 months, difficult par 4s, decent sample. Scottie, Sam Burns, Rory, Jake Knapp, which again, I don't know if Jake Knapp is going to be in the field. If he is, it's just hard to get a feel for his form. I mean, he was playing so well to start the year. It's a bummer for Jake Knapp. Like to joke about Cam Young's bugaboos on par 5s. Well, good news, Cam, you only got 2 this week. So par 4s are where it's at. Hatton again, Russell Henley, Patrick Reed, small sample for Laurie Kantner. That's been good for him. Matthew Fitzpatrick, Xander Schauffele, Matt McNeely, Victor Hovland, Bobby Mack, Akshay, all kind of at the top there, have separated strokes gained par 4s, difficult par 4 scoring. Let's look into some of the scoring specific metrics. We'll leave the par 4 scoring difficult on, see what that looks like if you want to see. You're not going to get a ton of birdies here. You're not getting anything from the rough. We saw that. You're barely hitting the fairway from the rough. But let's look at bogey avoidance in this situation here. Let's look at who's been really good there. Scottie, Fitz, Rory, Burns, Xander, Henley, Mav, Rose, Rahm, Cam Young. So just keeping bogeys off the card on difficult par 4s. You get a lot of names that are towards the top of the board. You can see their double bogey avoidance right next to them, which is interesting to see. Rose and Rory are the ones that kind of jump out to me. They're like, all right, they do a decent job of keeping the bogeys off the card, but those doubles can pop up relative to the field where you see, Rory's double bogey rate. It's small. We're talking about 2.5%, but it's double that of a lot of his peers in this. Whereas like, you're just not seeing Russell Henley make a double bogey, ever really. Like he's going to keep the ball in play. Like he might miss that putt, but like he's going to tap in for a bogey. He's not so far offline where he's, dealing with penalty strokes or dealing with the 10-inch fescue. That kind of shows up here a little bit too, as you kind of go down and kind of see where Jason Day, that's problematic. Goddard up same, like he's a little bit below field average in bogey avoidance, but his double bogeys are pretty good. So that's pretty nice to see. So let's see who's been real bad at, this is not great it's a small sample for Bryson, but real small sample for Bryson to be fair, but he's brought in some big numbers into the mix here. You mentioned Minwoo earlier. That can happen with Minwoo, JT, Ricky, Harman. Not surprising. But again, I think you made a good case for him at the top here. Rory's kind of the one that jumps out to me there as kind of a bigger number. So again, we're talking about something that happens slightly over 2% of the time, but these are, again, knowing that bogeys are out there, you really need to keep the doubles off the card this week for sure. Can't mess around with those.
Yeah, and since we're here, like scoring ops right here on this page as well. If you want to get a more detailed look at the exact ranges, the approach ranges, we have another view you can look at as well. But this kind of gives you the nuts and bolts of who's hitting it inside 5, 10, 15 feet, who's giving themselves scoring looks. Again, the par 4 difficult filters on here, so you can set that to anything you want.
Yep.
But I think this is a good way. Even if you want to look at this from a historical perspective on, major courses, but just even recent form like we kind of have here, it's another great way to see kind of who is, when par 4s are difficult in this case, who's putting themselves in position to at least, they may not make the putt, but they're giving themselves looks. And so, again, that's going to be crucial this week. There's not going to be many looks, but when you get one, can you take advantage?
Can you take advantage for sure? Right. Remember that the standard PGA Tour make rate from 8 feet is 50%. Right. So, we're looking at, if you looked at inside 10, this is great. Like this is still going down on average at a 50% rate. So, again, to Ron's point, like you want to give yourself these looks. These are also, if this is a scoring opportunity, look, I also feel pretty good about your chances of 2-putting that for par. And again, knowing that taking par and walking away gives yourself the best chance to win based off of what's happened here in the last, 4 or 5 stops at Shinnecock. Par is a fantastic score. So we want to give ourselves as many looks there as possible and take those 2 putts for par. So this is good news for me. My card is submitted, and you got a handful of guys here that are on the list unintentionally. I did not look at scoring opportunities inside 15 feet in the model, but the model did get me there in another way. So let's see who's not giving themselves many looks here. The bigger name, again, small sample for Rahm. Again, this is only going to be the utmost difficult to test for Rahm, and again, it's set to par 4 scoring difficult as well. Cam Smith can be all over the place. Let's see, we're going to get Bud Cauley and JT posted in the field here. The scoring, I'm trying to see some other guys. Bobby Mack showed a little bit in Canada after his approach play has been horrendous for, much of the last month or so. A lot of this is going to be small sample stuff for some of these guys. So that's a little bit tricky. So again, get in here yourself, play around with it. There are so many different ways to look at this week. Anything else for the folks before we wrap?
I'll just kind of repeat what you said. We didn't have that time to get into floor, ceiling, finish position. You can get in there and look at, top 5, top 10s and majors. There's so many things you can get into. First, if you're a first round leader better, you can focus on round 1 scoring. It's endless, the things you can do. We haven't even talked about the wind. Like you can create your own wind model in here with windy and moderate conditions. And so, we have all the weather stuff on the bottom there. So, so many things you can do tee time wise. The best way to do it is just to get in there and check it out. You got that $1 promo this week. It's a perfect time to kind of get in there and check all these filters out.
Yep. US Open for $1. If you're not sure which filters to click, you can both use, Ron's got a detailed course preview, which we showed a little bit at the top. You can, he'll set you up with some of those metrics that you can use. You can also use the course stats page here. It'll show you what some of the filtering options should look like. Again, don't click all of these and then try to run data. You're not going to find anything. Just pick, like we did here. We looked at difficult scoring. We looked at difficult par 4. We looked at difficult approach. Look at those things kind of independently. You can use those to build a model if you want. If you just want to see, confirmation bias on someone that you like, Jeff's in the chat, he likes Ty Hatton. We're pro Hatton here. I know Ron is very interested in Ty Hatton this week too. Nikolai, one and done picks come back tomorrow. Same channel, so Betsperts Golf, wherever you listen to the podcast. Betsperts Golf here on YouTube. The end of our Tuesday show, Tuesday 11 a.m. Eastern. Andy and I will share some, our betting cards, one and done picks, all that stuff for a little bit early in the week to get a sense of, where one and done ownership is going to be flocking to and all those things. So, give us a little bit more leeway and, time to get a little bit more educated on where we think there's going to be some edges. But yeah, check it out. Check out Betsperts Golf. Again, it is the rabbit hole, but you get all the content on the site as well. All the tools. There's not like different variations of subscriptions. You get all the tools. You want to bet matchups, you can go ahead and go into the tournament simulator, custom matchup tool, DFS optimizer. If you're playing, Showdown, or you're playing DraftKings or FanDuel, all these things are on here as well. You want some of the old stuff that you used to have over at Fantasy National with the lineup generator and all those things. Those are here in the legacy tool section as well. So again, promo code US Open for $1 for the week. So check that out. Again, read Ron's preview. It's good stuff as always. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe before you take off. Appreciate it as always. And again, as I referenced, come back tomorrow.